For 30 years, a simple battered box sat forgotten in the shadows of my attic, its secrets sealed away beneath layers of dust and old memories. I never imagined the day would come when my daughter would find it, her hands trembling as she lifted the lid and uncovered the letters I'd written in the quietest, loneliest nights of my life. I watched her eyes move across words I never dared to speak, and in that moment, everything between us began to change. Some truths are too heavy for silence, and some love stories are written in ink, hidden away until the day they finally demand to be read. Let me tell you the whole story, but first take a moment and hit that subscribe button. It will help me a lot to bear my expenses. So, it was one of those quiet Saturday mornings that seemed to stretch on forever, the kind where the sunlight slants through the curtains just right, and everything feels a little softer, a little slower. I remember the scent of lemon polish hanging in the air as I moved around my living room, my hands steady but my mind drifting through memories, some sweet, some bittersweet. My name is Margaret Johnson. I'm 72 now, and I've been a widow for nearly 10 years. Most days it's just me and the old grandfather clock ticking away in the hallway, the echoes of my children's laughter and footsteps still lingering in the corners of this house. Sometimes, if I close my eyes, I can almost hear Ben and Emily racing down the hallway, their giggles bouncing off the walls, or David's deep voice calling everyone to the dinner table. The house feels bigger now, quieter, filled with shadows of the life we built here. But that morning was different. Emily, my only daughter, had called the night before. She said she wanted to come by and help with some spring cleaning. I hesitated. At first, I never want to be a bother, and I know how busy she is with her own family and work. But she insisted, her voice warm and full of that familiar stubbornness that always made me smile. "It'll be fun, Mom. We can finally go through all those boxes in the attic you're always talking about." I agreed, though I'll admit, a part of me was secretly grateful for the company. Emily's life is so busy these days, and I miss her more than I let on. There's something about having your child under your roof again, even just for a day, that makes the world feel a little more right. She arrived just after 9, arms full of fresh pastries from the bakery down the street. The moment she walked in, the house felt lighter-like. She'd brought a bit of spring in with her, shaking off the dust and loneliness that sometimes settle in when you live alone. We sat at the kitchen table sharing coffee and pastries, talking about her work, her 2 boys, and all the little things that keep her running from morning to night. I just listened, soaking up every moment, grateful to have her close. I watched her hands as she talked, the same hands I used to hold when she was small, and I felt a wave of gratitude just to be sharing this ordinary morning with her. After breakfast, we got to work. I took the living room, dusting and rearranging the knickknacks I've collected over the years, while Emily moved from room to room with that energy she's always had. We ended up laughing over old photo albums, stopping every few minutes to reminisce about family vacations and holidays. At one point, Emily held up a photo of herself as a little girl, wild pigtails and a grin that could light up a room. "Did you really let me go out in public like this?" she teased. I laughed, a real deep laugh that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was the kind of laughter that fills up the cracks in your heart, even if just for a moment. As the sun climbed higher, Emily grew determined to tackle the attic. I rarely go up there anymore. It's a time capsule, really, filled with boxes and trunks I haven't touched in years. Every time I think about sorting through it, I find an excuse to put it off. I watched from the bottom of the stairs as she disappeared into the dimness. Above, her footsteps muffled by the dust. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. There are things up there I haven't thought about in decades. Things I'm not sure I'm ready to face. The attic holds more than just old holiday decorations and forgotten toys. It holds pieces of my past I've kept hidden, even from myself. A few minutes later, I heard her call down. "Mom, what's this?" Her voice was curious, almost excited. My heart skipped. I knew, without even seeing it, exactly what she had found. The box. Small, battered, covered in dust. I tucked it away behind old suitcases and Christmas decorations 30 years ago, never intending for anyone to find it, least of all Emily. She came back down, carrying the box so carefully, like it was something precious. She set it on the coffee table and brushed off the dust. "It was way in the back," she said, her eyes shining with curiosity. "Did you forget about it?" My hands went cold. The memories tied to that box are heavy, and I wasn't sure I was ready to open them up, even to my own daughter. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, torn between wanting to protect my secrets and wondering if, maybe, it was finally time to let them see the light. Trying to sound casual, I said, "Oh, that old thing. It's just some letters from a long time ago." I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could hear the slight tremor in it. Emily was already lifting the lid before I could protest, her curiosity always just a little stronger than my attempts to keep things hidden. Inside were dozens of envelopes, each one addressed in my own careful handwriting. Some were yellowed and delicate, the edges curling from years spent tucked away. Others were still crisp, the ink dark and sure, as if I'd written them just yesterday. Seeing them all together like that, exposed to the light of day, made me feel strangely vulnerable, as if I'd left a window open in my soul. Emily picked up one of the letters, turning it over in her hands, her fingers lingering on the loops of my script. "Who are these for?" she asked, her voice so gentle, almost as if she was afraid of disturbing something sacred. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and searching. In that moment, a swirl of anxiety and longing washed over me. Part of me wanted to reach out, to snatch the box away and hide it again, to keep my secrets safe where no one could judge or misunderstand them. But another part of me, the part that had grown tired of carrying all that weight alone, wondered if, after all these years, it was finally time for the truth to come out. I sat down beside Emily, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure she could hear it. My hands fidgeted in my lap as I watched her sift through the letters, her brow furrowed in concentration, her touch gentle and respectful, as if she knew just how fragile those pages and the memories inside them really were. The room was so quiet you could hear the soft rustle of paper, and somewhere in the background, the steady, relentless ticking of the grandfather clock. I felt suspended in that stillness, caught between the comfort of the present and the ache of the past, as my mind tumbled back through the years to all those nights I'd sat alone at the kitchen table, pouring my heart onto those very pages. I wrote words I could never bring myself to say aloud, fears, regrets, hopes, and memories that felt too heavy to share in the moment. Each letter was a piece of my soul, a record of everything I'd loved, everything I'd lost, and everything I still wished for. When Emily finally looked up, her eyes met mine, searching my face for answers, silently asking questions I'd spent a lifetime avoiding. In that moment, I knew the time I'd dreaded had come. The past wasn't tucked away in the attic anymore. It was right here between us, waiting to be faced together. I braced myself, not knowing whether she would be angry, hurt, or simply confused. But I also felt an unexpected sense of relief, as if a weight I'd carried for decades was finally shifting. As Emily continued to sift through the box, I couldn't help but drift back to a different era, a time when this house was alive with the sounds of laughter, hurried footsteps, and the beautiful chaos of family life. 30 years ago, our home was a whirlwind of activity. I remember waking up before dawn to make breakfast for David and the kids. The kitchen would fill with the smell of toast and coffee, the clatter of cereal bowls, and the hum of the radio playing softly in the background. Emily would come bounding down the stairs, her hair sticking up in every direction, always searching for her backpack at the last minute. Ben, just 6 then, would grumble about his cereal, and David would sit at the table, already buried in the morning paper, a crease of worry between his brows. The mornings were always a blur, but in those small rituals, pouring orange juice, tying shoelaces, smoothing down cowlicks, I found a sense of purpose that anchored me. Emily was always so curious, her eyes bright and full of questions about the world. I can still picture her at 8 years old, sitting at the kitchen table, with a box of crayons, drawing pictures of all of us and taping them proudly to the refrigerator. Ben idolized his big sister, following her everywhere, especially when they played in the backyard and invented their secret worlds. I'd watch them from the window, my heart swelling with love and gratitude, even as a quiet worry about the future crept in. I wanted to freeze those moments, to hold on to the innocence and joy that filled our home, to keep my children safe from the storms I felt gathering on the horizon. But beneath those golden days, shadows lingered, shadows I never let the children see. David, who had once been so attentive, gradually grew distant. His hours at the law firm stretched longer, and when he finally came home, his mind was somewhere else. At first, the arguments were quiet, whispered behind closed doors. Over time, they grew louder, sharper, echoing in the spaces I tried so hard to keep safe for Emily and Ben. I did everything I could to shield them from the tension, pasting on a smile and keeping our routines as normal as possible. I poured myself into motherhood, determined to give my children the stability and love I feared was slipping away from my marriage. There were sacrifices I made that Emily never knew about. I let go of my dream to return to school, choosing instead to take a part-time job at the local library, just to help keep us afloat. Friendships faded as my world narrowed to the walls of our home and the needs of my family. Some nights, after everyone was asleep, I'd sit alone at the kitchen table, the silence pressing in on me. My thoughts would swirl with worry and loneliness, and it was during those hours that I first began to write the letters. Letters to Emily, to Ben, and sometimes to the woman I used to be. I poured my fears, my hopes, and my regrets onto the page, finding a strange comfort in words I could never speak aloud. Now, watching Emily hold those letters in her hands, I wondered if she could sense all that I had tried to protect her from. I wondered if she would understand why I wrote instead of speaking, why I hid my pain behind a smile, and why, after all these years, the truth was still so hard to share. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to let her see the whole of me, the mother she knew, and the woman she never really saw. And as I sat there, the late morning sun warming my shoulders, I realized that the distance between us had never been about love, but about the words we'd never dared to say. Those letters became my lifeline. When I felt like I was drowning, in silence, when the house was dark and the ache of loneliness pressed in on me, I'd reach for pen and paper. Writing was the only way I knew how to process pain I couldn't share with anyone else, not even my closest friends. There were things I couldn't say over coffee or during quick phone calls. The words were too heavy, too tangled with guilt and longing. So I wrote them down, hoping that by putting them on paper I could lighten my heart, even if just a little. I wrote about the good times, of course. I wanted to remember the birthday parties with balloons bobbing on the ceiling, and homemade cakes that always came out a little lopsided but were devoured with laughter anyway. I wanted to capture the family picnics where we'd spread a blanket under the old oak tree at the park, the sun warm on our faces, and the sound of Emily's laughter floating on the breeze. I wrote about Ben's muddy soccer games, the grass, stains on his knees, and the way he'd run to me after every match, win or lose, looking for a hug. I wrote about the quiet magic of ordinary evenings, all four of us squeezed together on the living room couch, the glow of the TV flickering across our faces as we watched movies and shared popcorn. Those moments were precious, and writing them down helped me hold on to them, even as the years blurred their edges. But I also wrote about the heartbreak, the nights David didn't come home, the arguments that left me feeling small and invisible, the dreams I quietly let die in the shadows of responsibility. Sometimes I'd sit at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to bed, the only sound the ticking clock and the low, steady hum of the refrigerator. I'd write about the ache of lying awake, waiting for the front door to open, wondering if David would come home at all, and if he did, whether he'd speak to me or just disappear into silence. I wrote about the words we hurled at each other, behind closed doors, words that left bruises no one could see. I wrote about how sometimes I felt like I was vanishing, bit by bit, into the background of my own life, my needs and hopes, dissolving into the endless routine of holding everyone else together. Those words were raw and unfiltered. I never meant for anyone to read them, least of all my children. They were simply a record of my truth, hidden away in the hope that someday, maybe, they'd help me make sense of it all. I thought if I could just get the feelings out of my head and onto the page, I could keep going for another day. I could find a way to smile, to pack lunches and fold laundry and show up for Emily and Ben with the love and steadiness they deserved. Now, sitting beside Emily as she handled those letters with such care, I wondered if perhaps the time had come for those truths to finally be shared. The memories were bittersweet, a tapestry of love and loss, woven together by the choices I'd made and the secrets I'd kept. As Emily glanced up at me, her eyes searching for answers, I braced myself for the conversation I had spent a lifetime avoiding. I felt exposed, but also strangely relieved, as if a door I'd kept locked for decades was finally opening and letting in the light. I remember the very first night I sat down to write a letter. The house was silent, the children finally, asleep, and only the faint hum of the refrigerator kept me company. I pulled out a pad of stationery and a pen, my hands trembling as I searched for the right words. That first letter was for Emily, my sweet, inquisitive girl, who always seemed to sense when something was wrong, even before I did. I wrote about the joy she brought into my life, the pride I felt watching her grow, and the silent hope that she would never feel the loneliness I sometimes carried in my heart. I wanted her to know, even if only on paper, how deeply she was loved and how much she meant to me. As the years passed, these midnight writing sessions became a ritual. Whenever the weight of my unspoken worries became too much to bear, I'd retreat to the kitchen, pour myself a cup of tea, and let my thoughts spill onto the page. Some letters were filled with happy memories. Emily's first school recital, Ben's triumphant grin after learning to ride his bike, the way we'd all pile onto the couch for movie nights and laugh until our sides hurt. I'd write about the ordinary joys, the smell of rain on the garden, the warmth of fresh-baked bread, the softness of Emily's hair as I braided it before school, Ben's sleepy smile as he hugged his stuffed bear good night. But others were heavy with sorrow and regret. I wrote about the nights David didn't come home, about the arguments that seemed to echo long after the words had faded, about the dreams I'd quietly set aside for the sake of my family. There were letters I wrote in anger, my pen pressing hard into the paper as I tried to make sense of David's coldness and my own growing sense of isolation. There were letters written in tears, the ink smudged by the weight of my grief, when I wondered if I was failing everyone I loved. And there were letters written in hope, on those rare good days when I'd catch a glimpse of the love that once held us together and believe, just for a moment, that things could change. Each letter was a piece of myself, a record of the woman I was, and the woman I wished I could be. They were my silent companions through the hardest years, a way to hold on to myself when everything else felt uncertain. Now, as I watched Emily reading those words, I wondered if she could see not just her mother, but the whole, complicated woman I'd always been. A woman who loved deeply, who struggled and hoped, who tried her best, and who, in the end, never stopped believing in the power of love, even when it hurt. But I never mailed those letters. I never shared them with anyone, not even the friends I trusted most. Instead, I tucked them away in that old box, hiding them beneath layers of outgrown clothes and forgotten holiday decorations in the attic. The box became a secret part of my life, something I would glance at every now and then when I went searching for winter coats or old Christmas lights, always telling myself it was better this way. I told myself it was for the best. The truth, I believed, would only hurt Emily and Ben. They didn't need to know about the cracks in their parents' marriage, the sacrifices I'd made, or the nights I spent wondering if I was enough. I wanted to spare them the weight of adult worries, to let them keep their memories of childhood untouched by the shadows that sometimes haunted me. My internal monologue was a constant companion during those years. I was afraid that revealing my pain would burden my children, that they'd see me not as the strong, loving mother they remembered, but as a woman who had struggled and sometimes failed. I worried they would look at me differently, that the image of the mother who could fix anything would be shattered. There was shame, too. Shame in admitting that my marriage was not the fairy tale I'd once imagined, that I had dreams I'd never pursued, that I sometimes felt desperately alone, even in a house full of people. It's a strange thing, loneliness. You can be surrounded by family, by laughter and noise, and still feel like you're standing on the other side of a glass wall, unable to reach out. Mostly, though, I hid the letters out of love. I wanted to protect Emily and Ben from the harsh realities of adulthood for as long as possible. I wanted them to remember their childhood as a time of warmth and safety, not as a battleground for secrets and disappointments. So I kept writing, and I kept hiding, hoping that one day, if the letters were ever found, they'd be understood not as confessions of weakness, but as acts of love, a mother's attempt to leave behind a record of her truest self. I hoped that someday those words would help them understand me, not just as their mother, but as a woman with her own fears, hopes, and dreams. As I watched Emily cradle that old box of letters in her lap, I couldn't help but wonder if my reasons for hiding them away still made sense. For so many years I convinced myself I was protecting her and Ben, shielding them from the messier parts of our family's story. But now, seeing her fingers trembling over the envelopes, I wondered if it was finally time for those unspoken stories to be heard. Maybe she was ready to know the truth. Maybe I was ready too. Emily settled herself on the edge of the floral sofa, the same one she used to curl up on as a little girl with her favorite storybook. I could see her searching my face for permission, her eyes gentle and full of questions. I gave her a small, nervous nod, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. Quietly, I excused myself to the kitchen, telling her I'd put the kettle on. But really, I just needed a moment to steady myself. My hands shook as I filled the kettle, and I found myself straining to hear any sound from the living room. Part of me wanted to rush back in, to explain everything, to comfort her. But I knew this was something Emily needed to experience on Her own for the first time, these words were hers, as much as they were mine. The house felt unusually still, almost as if it was holding its breath with us. The only sounds were the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint creak of the floorboards as I paced. In the living room, I pictured Emily opening the first letter, recognizing my rounded handwriting. So familiar, so unmistakably Mom. I imagined her eyes moving across the page, her face shifting from curiosity to confusion, and then to something deeper, something that would reach all the way to her heart. That first letter was gentle. I'd written it on a night when she was still a little girl, and I wanted her to know how much she meant to me. I wrote about her first day of school, how she'd clung to my hand at the gate, and how proud I felt watching her find her courage. I wrote about the nights she'd crawl into bed with us after a bad dream, her small arms wrapping around my neck, and the way her laughter could fill our home with light. I wanted her to feel my love in every word, and I hoped she'd smile through her tears, just as I had when I wrote it. Even now, standing in the kitchen with the kettle whistling softly, I hoped those words would wrap around her like a warm blanket, letting her know that no matter what else I had hidden, my love for her was always true and constant. But as Emily continued reading, I knew the letters would grow more complicated, more raw. I had written about the loneliness that crept in as David grew more distant, about the sacrifices I made to keep our family afloat, about the dreams I quietly let slip away so Emily and Ben would never go without. There were nights when the house felt impossibly large and empty, when I would sit at the kitchen table long after midnight, the only light coming from the lamp above me, and the only company the gentle hum of the refrigerator. I poured my heart onto paper because I couldn't find the words to say out loud. It was safer to write them, to let the page absorb my doubts and fears, than to risk burdening anyone else with them. I wrote about the arguments behind closed doors, the financial worries that kept me up at night, the moments when I questioned whether I was enough for any of them. I wrote about the ache of watching David's love fade, about the way I sometimes felt invisible, holding everything together while quietly falling apart inside. I wrote about the guilt I carried for not being able to fix it all, for not being the perfect wife or the perfect mother, and about the quiet resignation that came with letting go of the dreams I'd once held so tightly. For the first time, I realized Emily was seeing me not just as her steady, reliable mother, but as a woman who had endured heartbreak and disappointment, who had loved fiercely, even when it hurt. Letter after letter, the truth unfolded. I had shielded her and Ben from so much, my pain, my doubts, my longing for a different life. But I also wrote about the joy my children brought me, the pride I felt in their accomplishments, and the forgiveness I found in my heart for David. Even as our marriage unraveled, there were confessions of fear, but also of hopes that Emily would grow up strong and kind, that she'd find happiness and never feel the loneliness I had known. I wrote about the little victories, the way Emily's laughter could chase away my darkest moods, the pride I felt when Ben stood up for his sister at school, the quiet mornings when, for a moment, everything felt possible again. As I waited in the kitchen, I could almost feel the tears streaming down her face, even though I couldn't see her. I imagined the wave of emotions, shock at the hardships I'd hidden, sorrow for the pain I'd endured, but also, I hoped, a deep and overwhelming gratitude. Each letter was a testament to a mother's love, a record of sacrifices made quietly, without expectation of thanks or recognition. I wanted her to know that even in my weakest moments, my love for her and Ben never wavered. I wanted her to see the whole, complicated truth of who I was, not just the mother who packed lunches and kissed scraped knees, but the woman who struggled, who hoped, who sometimes failed, and who always, always loved. And as I stood there, I realized that maybe, just maybe, it was time for Emily to know the whole story, not just the happy memories, but the truth of who I am and the love that shaped every word I wrote. I stood just out of sight, my heart pounding with every minute that ticked by. I wondered what Emily was thinking as she read. Would she be angry with me for hiding so much, or hurt by the truths I'd kept from her? Would she understand why I did it, or would she feel betrayed? The silence in the house was broken only by the sound of pages turning, and every so often I heard a soft, choked sob that made my own eyes sting with tears. I pressed my hand to my chest, breathing deeply, hoping that when she finally looked up, she would see not just her mother, but a woman who had done her best, with all her flaws, her fears, and her boundless love. Finally, I heard the gentle thud of the letters being set aside. My breath caught as I peeked around the corner, my hands twisting nervously in the dish towel. There was Emily, sitting on the edge of the sofa, her shoulders shaking as she wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. Her whole face was transformed, not just by tears, but by something deeper, something softer. It was as if all the years of unspoken stories, all the hidden pain I'd carried in silence, had finally melted away, and in their place was a bond stronger than I'd ever dared hope for. I watched her stand, her movements hesitant, as if she was still absorbing the weight of everything she'd just read. My heart pounded in my chest as I braced myself for whatever would come next. For the first time, the truth was no longer a burden I carried alone. The secrets I'd locked away for decades were now out in the open, and I felt both terrified and strangely free. Emily appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, clutching one of my letters to her chest as if it were a lifeline. Her eyes were red and puffy, but there was a new tenderness in her face, a mixture of sorrow, love, and understanding that nearly undid me. She looked at me, and in that moment I saw that not just my daughter, but a woman who was reaching out to me, who wanted to bridge the distance that had grown between us over the years. I turned from the counter, my own tears finally breaking free after so long, spent holding them back. They slid down my cheeks, warm and unstoppable, and I let them fall. "Mom." Emily's voice trembled as she spoke. "I never knew. I never realized how much you went through, how much you sacrificed for us." She took a shaky breath, her words tumbling out, raw and honest, as if she'd been holding them in for years. "Why didn't you ever tell me? Why did you keep all of this inside?" There was so much pain in her voice, but also so much love, a desperate need to understand, to connect. I wiped my hands on the dish towel, my heart pounding so hard it ached. I searched for the right words, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I wanted to protect you, Emily. I didn't want you or Ben to worry, or to see the cracks in our family. I thought if I just held everything together, you'd remember. Your childhood is happy. I was afraid that if you knew the truth, it would hurt you." My voice shook as I spoke, the years of secrecy and fear finally spilling out. "I was just trying to do my best, even if it wasn't perfect." Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "But Mom, I wish you'd let me in. I wish I could have helped you. I always thought you were so strong, like nothing could ever shake you. I never knew you felt so alone." She stepped closer, her voice breaking with emotion. "I'm sorry if I ever made you feel like you had to hide from me. I wish I could have been there for you, the way you were always there for me." That was all it took. My own tears fell freely now, the dam finally breaking after years of holding everything inside. I reached out and took Emily's hands in mine, my grip trembling, but desperate to hold on. You were just a child. I never wanted you to carry my burdens. I did what I thought was best, but maybe I was wrong. I'm so sorry, Emily, for all the things I kept from you, for the times I wasn't as present as I should have been. I wanted to be strong for you, but I see now that maybe real strength would have been letting you in. We stood there in the kitchen, the weight of years of silence and misunderstanding pressing down on us. The world outside seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of us, mother and daughter, finally facing the truth together. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was our quiet sobbing, the kind that comes from deep inside, the kind that washes away old wounds and makes space for something new to grow. Then Emily stepped forward and pulled me into a tight embrace, holding me as if she could somehow make up for all the lost time. I wrapped my arms around her, holding on as tightly as I could, feeling her warmth, her forgiveness, her love. We wept together, our tears mingling, washing away the pain of unspoken words and hidden sorrow. It was as if we were both being cleansed, our hearts finally open to each other in a way they never had been before. Between sobs, Emily whispered, "I love you, Mom. I always have. And now, I think I understand you more than ever." Her words wrapped around my heart, soothing old hurts I'd carried for so long. I hugged her tighter, relief and healing flooding through me in a way I hadn't known was possible. I love you too, sweetheart, more than you'll ever know. You and Ben were always my light, even in the darkest times. In that embrace, I felt the years of distance and misunderstanding dissolve. The kitchen, once filled with the ghosts of the past, now felt lighter, warmer, filled with the promise of forgiveness and a new beginning. For the first time in a long time, I truly believed that we could move forward, together, with nothing left between us but love. In that moment, all the years of misunderstanding and silence seemed to dissolve. The kitchen, once filled with the ghosts of the past, now felt lighter, warmer, filled with the promise of forgiveness and a new beginning. It was as if the very walls, so long accustomed to holding secrets, could finally breathe again. The heaviness that had pressed down on my heart for decades began to lift, replaced by a gentle peace I hadn't known in years. We stood together, not just as mother and daughter, but as two women, two survivors, united by truth, compassion, and the unbreakable bond of love. There was a sense of peace between us, a quiet understanding that didn't need words. Our tears had washed away the distance, and for the first time I felt as if I could reach out and touch the future without fear. Later that afternoon, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, casting golden patterns across the table, where Emily and I now sat side by side. The light danced across her hair and the wood grain, making the whole room glow. The kitchen, once a place where I'd hidden my worries behind busy hands and polite smiles, now felt like a sanctuary. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly seen and truly loved. I realized how much I had longed for this feeling, how much I had missed being able to share my real self without fear or shame. It was as if I had been living in a dim room, and someone had finally opened the curtains wide. The box of letters sat between us on the kitchen table, no longer a burden I needed to hide, but a bridge, a testament to everything Emily and I had endured and overcome. I watched her as she gently traced her fingers over the envelopes, her expression thoughtful and a little wistful. She lingered over the handwriting, sometimes smiling, sometimes sighing, as if she could feel the years in every line and loop. It struck me how much she'd grown, not just into a capable woman and mother, but into someone who could hold my truth with such grace. She was no longer just my little girl. She was my confidant, my friend, someone who could meet me in my vulnerability and not turn away. We sat quietly for a while, the only sounds the soft ticking of the clock and the distant chatter of birds outside the window. I could see the sunlight shifting across the table, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. I thought about all the afternoons I'd spent at this very table helping with homework, icing birthday cakes, worrying over bills. I remembered the times I'd sat alone, pouring my heart into those letters, never imagining that one day I would share them with Emily like this. She looked up at me, her voice soft and tentative. "What should we do with them, Mom? They're a part of our story now. Maybe Ben should read them too, when he's ready." I could hear the hope and uncertainty in her words, and it made my heart ache in the best possible way. I could see her thinking about her brother, about her own children, about how the stories we keep shape the people we love. I could tell she was imagining a future where honesty and understanding would be the legacy we passed down, not silence and secrets. I considered her question, feeling my heart lighter than it had in years. "I think I'd like to keep them, at least for now," I said, my voice gentle but certain. "Maybe one day when the time is right we can share them with Ben, or even with your boys, when they're old enough to understand." I smiled at her, feeling a quiet strength I hadn't felt in so long. These letters helped me survive some of the hardest days of my life, but today I feel like I can finally let go of the sadness they held. It was a relief to say it out loud, to acknowledge that I no longer needed to cling to the pain that once defined me. Emily nodded, and I felt her hand reach across the table to squeeze mine. Her touch was warm and steady, grounding me in the present. "Thank you for trusting me, Mom, for letting me see all of you, the strong parts and the vulnerable ones. I love you even more for it." Her words wrapped around my heart like a warm embrace, and I squeezed her hand back, grateful beyond measure for this second chance. I realized that in sharing my story, I had not only freed myself, but had given Emily a gift too, the gift of knowing her mother, fully and truly, at last. We sat there for a while longer, the afternoon sun slowly shifting. Across the table, the silence between us comfortable and full of understanding. I looked at Emily and saw not just my daughter, but a woman who had inherited my resilience, my hope, and my capacity for love. I thought about how far we had come from the days when I had hidden my pain behind a smile, to this moment of honesty and connection. I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. No more secrets, no more burdens carried alone, just the enduring joy of a mother and daughter who had finally found their way back to each other. As the light faded and the shadows grew longer, I felt a sense of closure and renewal. The past was still a part of us, but it no longer held us captive. The future, for the first time in a long time, felt open and bright. And as I sat there, holding my daughter's hand, I knew that we had both been changed not by the pain we had endured, but by the love and forgiveness we had found in each other. We decided together to tuck the letters back into the box, wrapping them in a soft cloth and placing them on a high shelf in my bedroom. There was a gentle ceremony to it, as if we were honoring something sacred, a ritual that marked the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. The box wasn't hidden anymore, but it wasn't on display either, just waiting, quietly, for the right moment to be shared again. It felt right, like closing a chapter with care, but not locking it away. As we stood there, our hands resting on the lid for a lingering moment, I felt a deep sense of closure and peace. We exchanged a small, knowing smile, silently acknowledging the journey we had just taken together, one that had traversed decades of silence, pain, and ultimately, forgiveness. Afterward, we found ourselves lingering in the bedroom, talking quietly about everything and nothing. The air felt lighter, as if the room itself had been unburdened by the truth we'd finally allowed to breathe. I watched Emily as she looked around, her gaze lingering on old family photos and the faded quilt at the foot of my bed. There was a softness in her eyes, a new understanding that made me feel closer to her than I ever had before. For the first time in years, I felt as though I could exhale without fear that everything would fall apart. As evening settled over the neighborhood and the sky turned a gentle shade of lavender, Emily and I put on our coats and stepped outside for a walk. The air was crisp, carrying the sweet scent of blooming lilacs from the garden and the faint, earthy promise of spring. We strolled down the familiar sidewalk, arm in arm, our steps falling into an easy, perfect rhythm. The houses we passed were quiet, their windows glowing softly in the dusk, and I felt as if the world itself was pausing to let us savor this new beginning. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen. My burdens were no longer mine alone to carry. My heart was at peace, buoyed by the quiet strength of the woman beside me. The neighborhood was alive with the gentle sounds of evening children's laughter, echoing faintly from a distant yard, the chirping of birds settling in for the night, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. We passed the old maple tree where Emily and Ben used to play, and I found myself sharing stories from their childhood, stories I hadn't told in years. Emily listened, sometimes laughing, sometimes squeezing my arm, and I realized how much I had missed these simple, unhurried moments together. We didn't need to say much. The silence between us was comfortable, filled with understanding and love. There was no need to fill the air with words. Every step, every gentle squeeze of Emily's arm spoke volumes. I glanced up at the sky, streaked with the last golden rays of sun, and felt a deep, quiet gratitude for this new chapter. A chapter built on honesty, forgiveness, and the quiet promise that, whatever came next, we would face it together. As we walked beneath the soft glow of the streetlights, I realized that the past, with all its pain and secrets, was no longer something to fear. It was a part of our story, yes, but it didn't have to define our future. With Emily by my side, I felt ready to embrace whatever tomorrow would bring. The world felt open again, full of possibility, and I found myself looking forward instead of back. We stopped for a moment at the corner, watching as the sun dipped below the rooftops, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. I took a deep breath, savoring the cool air, the scent of earth and flowers, the warmth of Emily's hand in mine. As we turned the corner, I glanced over at Emily, feeling my heart brim with a fullness I hadn't known in years. The golden light caught her hair, and for a moment she looked just like the little girl who used to run ahead of me on these very sidewalks, always turning back to make sure I was close behind. I remembered the sound of her laughter, the way she'd reach for my hand when she was unsure, the trust in her eyes. Now, as adults, our roles had shifted, but the bond between us was stronger than ever. In that quiet moment, I realized the past, with all its pain, secrets, and silent sacrifices, was finally behind us. I no longer felt weighed down by what I'd hidden or what I'd lost. Instead, I felt light, as if forgiveness and understanding had lifted a burden I'd carried for too long. The road ahead felt open and bright, filled with hope, healing, and the simple, enduring joy of walking forward with my daughter by my side. We didn't need words. Our hands found each other naturally, fingers entwined, and we walked on together side by side, mother and daughter, ready to face whatever life would bring, together. The rhythm of our steps felt like a quiet promise, a silent vow that no matter what storms might come, we would weather them together. In that moment, I knew that love, honest and true, was enough to carry us through anything. As we made our way home, the first stars appeared in the evening sky, and I felt a gentle certainty settle in my heart. The past had shaped us, but it no longer held us captive. The future was ours to write, and as long as we had each other, I knew we'd find joy, even in the simplest of days. The streetlights flickered on, casting long soft shadows on the path ahead, and I realized that this was what healing looked like. Not a sudden miracle, but a quiet, steady unfolding of trust and love, step by step, hand in hand. If this video fascinated you, make sure to hit subscribe button and share the story to someone you love. Thank you for listening to your own channel, Tales for Her.